Assalamu alaikum and a very good morning to all of you. I welcome you all to the Education Grand Round organized by Department for Educational Development at the Khan University, Karachi. I'm Dr. Javeera Rahman, Senior Instructor from Department for Educational Development and Pathology and Laboratory Medicine, and I will be moderating the session today. The format of this session is based on 45 minutes of presentation by our invited speaker, followed by 15 minutes of question and answers. A Google form link will be shared in the chat box for our online participants who are still joining and on which they can post their questions. Just as a reminder, we would request please keep yourself muted and in terms of your online participants, and also keep your phones on silent. So moving on, it is my pleasure to introduce our invited speaker today, Dr. Anna Cianciolo, who has an impressive profile from which I would like to highlight some key points. Dr. Anna is a professor of medical education at Southern Illinois University School of Medicine and editor-in-chief in Teaching and Learning in Medicine. He has served as chair of the Medical Education Scholarship, Research, and Evaluation section at the Association of American Medical Colleges. He is a recipient of Miriam Friedman Ben David New Educator Award by the Association of Medical Education in Europe, AME. Thank you for joining, Dr. Anna, and over to you for the presentation.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. It's delightful to be here with you and talk a little bit today about how you can celebrate authentically your context in an effort to be published in international journals. I'm going to start my slides here and see if I can share. Oh, that's not going to work. I have to share first, looks like. Okay, here we go. All right, are you able to see the slides?
Yes, we can see that. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. All right. Well, again, thank you so much for having me here to speak with you this morning. I'm delighted to chat with you about some observations that I've had as editor-in-chief of Teaching and Learning in Medicine about how we can increase the diversity of voices, the geographic diversity of voices in international journals. So the goals that I have for this session is first, I would really like to help you address an immediate and practical challenge designing and reporting research that's publishable in international journals because it speaks to a so-called global audience. And by introducing contextual frameworks, I aim to guide you in designing research that is both authentic to your interests and concerns and publishable in international journals. In this way, I hope to help you achieve your personal and professional research goals. So that is our focus for today. Starting with some disclosures, I declare that I do not have any financial relationship with proprietary entities producing, marketing, reselling, or distributing healthcare goods or services consumed or used on patients in the past 24 months, or honestly ever. So we're good there. All right. So let's start with this so-called global audience. Pleasing this audience is the problem that we're going to try to address today. And as a quiet personal reflection, I just ask, how many of you have received comments like this in your rejection letters? What on earth does this so-called global audience want? Okay. All right. For a second, let's consider this screen capture of a TLM article that was published online ahead of print in 2023. This open access article was authored by a research team located in Qatar. It has been downloaded 2,925 times as of the time that I took this screen capture, more than any other article in the issue in which it appears, and it has been cited 3 times. The altmetric score of 2 indicates that this article has been shared on social media twice, directly from TLM's journal website. You can find this article using the QR code I provided here, or by browsing TLM's website, or via email alerts from our publisher, social media posts by colleagues, or by searching publication indexes like PubMed or Google Scholar. So, who downloaded this article? Why? And where are they located? Who subsequently published an article that cited this one? Who encountered this article at the TLM website and shared it on social media? Presumably, it's these people who make up TLM's audience. Okay, so we have some data to track TLM's audience, which comes from our publisher's annual reports. For example, this table shows the top 10 institutions by article downloads in 2024. Interestingly, the top institution was from China. Okay. This image shows institutional access to TLM by region. While the majority of these institutions are located in North America and Europe, 29% are not located there. We have no way to account for the individuals who download articles with or without institutional access, or even how the open access articles we publish factor into large language models that are increasingly being used to support background literature reviews. So in light of these data, what is a global audience? Well, we know that online publications may be discovered and accessed from anywhere by anyone's, that's institutions or individuals, including AI developers. An international journal like TLM has readers from all over the world, although currently predominantly in North America and Europe, although that's changing. Publishers are striving to improve global access, diversifying journal readership. They're at Taylor and Francis alone, which is the second largest academic publisher in the world. They are engaged in numerous marketing efforts to expand things like open access to geographic regions all over the world. They are engaged in marketing campaigns to boost submissions to Taylor and Francis journals, and they do things like scaling article processing charges and other costs associated with publishing to try to expand access to these journals. So it isn't just the work of editors that is shaping who can be part of the global audience, but publishers themselves. They're actually a main driving force in this kind of thing. And then finally, in the absence of concerted outreach to readers everywhere and detailed data about publication access, the global what the global audience is largely means whatever the user of this term thinks it means. Knowing how editors and peer reviewers define global audience is important because apparently you must please this very picky, if mysterious, audience to get published. So, trying to appeal to a global audience, this has been my observation as an editor, that the advice that scholars get that for how to appeal to a global audience ends up shifting into what have come to understand as contextual absence. And so here again is kind of a quiet reflection I ask. have you in the faculty development sessions that you've attended, in the Masters in Health Professions education certifications or degree programs that you've participated in webinars and seminars, how have you been advised to generate research questions and frame your inquiry? For example, were you encouraged to consider what high impact journal editors want you to study instead of what you want to study? Were you directed to read literature and use theories or tools that were not developed in your setting or culture and may not function in that setting? Were you told not to talk about your local context because context is subjective information that is irrelevant to readers of high impact journals? Sometimes well-meaning advice to design publishable research equates the global audience with the editors and peer reviewers of high-impact journals, and these people typically represent a tiny subset of stakeholders in medical education research. In this case, achieving global appeal is thought to require obscuring one's local interests, concerns, and approaches to inquiry. And this is where authors in regions that lie outside where the dominant groups of peer reviewers and editors come from really struggle to have their voices heard. I'm going to give you a concrete example of contextual absence that I've observed. Um, as an editor situated in the US, I commonly see submissions from authors that seek to please this global audience by erasing the author's local context. So first, the author's country is missing from the manuscript title and sometimes also from the abstract. And I should note that when the authors are in the US or in Canada or some other country that represents what we call the big five countries in medical education research, which would be the US, the UK, Canada, Australia, and the Netherlands. Even they leave their country name out of the title, but for different reasons. They universalize the relevance and the applicability of their work, and so don't even consider why it would be important to leave their country, to explicitly put their country name in the title and abstract. Um, and then we have authors from elsewhere who are guided to leave that information out. Okay. In the introduction section of these manuscripts, what we see is a comprehensive literature review. That's not a poor quality literature review, but it's summarizing what the readership of the journal likely already knows. So it's a focus on the topic of study, but not a focus on the elements of that topic of study that are most relevant to the research questions in a local conceptual and practical context. So an example would be a study that is maybe about problem-based learning or OSCEs or something of that nature, and the literature review is the complete history of problem-based learning or OSCEs. And it almost feels like the comprehensiveness and the duration of time covered by these literature reviews is a way to convey the expertise that the authors have developed in the knowledge base in those areas, but that expertise is not necessarily demonstrated in terms of its relevance to the research question itself. Another example is, let's say the authors are interested in studying emotional intelligence or burnout, and the literature review summarizes every variable that has ever correlated with these constructs, rather than the literature review being focused on what were the constructs that were of particular interest to the authors of this study. Um, so it's not a, like I said, it's not a bad literature review, but it's quite expansive and it's lacking connection to the work that the authors have sought to do. And then at the very end of what is often a quite lengthy introduction section, we see a single sentence or maybe a tiny paragraph claiming that the topic of study has never been explored in the author's own country. So what we have is this large body of literature, and then the sole case or argument that is made for why this study is important is that it's never been done in the author's country. And it's not to say that looking at these phenomena in other countries that are different from where the phenomena were first investigated isn't important. It is very important. But what we want to do is demonstrate in our introductory sections we want to demonstrate the value of studying these things in context by foregrounding the reasons why these phenomena were studied in this country, other than just because it's never been done before. And we'll get into what that looks like. Okay. And an example sentence, this is just an aggregate sentence that I created from many, many manuscripts. There's a dearth of research on topic of interest in medical education in the XYZ country's context. Okay. So how are we going to be authentic to context and appeal to the global audience when we're being told that the global audience doesn't want to know about our context or doesn't understand why the topics we want to study should be relevant to them? Um, the advice that was documented in Atta et al. 2024 is to recognize and celebrate local assets. And the argument here is to build contextual frameworks into your inquiry to authentically, meaningfully, and unapologetically represent your local context and make a compelling case for why research in your setting matters to readers around the world. It is not a given that if you are doing research outside of the so-called Big Five countries, that the people in those Big Five countries don't have something important and valuable to learn from what it is that you have studied. And so hopefully by teaching you about contextual frameworks, I can help you bring out what that value is in the arguments that you make in your manuscripts. Okay. So, what does a contextual framework look like in a manuscript introduction section? This introduction includes a summary of the local educational problem that's motivating the present study. That is a problem that it's a description of the problem that includes its nature, its impact, and its local implications. So all of you are thoughtful, reflective, curious educators who want to improve the quality of the instruction that your students or your residents, your graduate trainees are participating in. You may be curious and interested in developing the well-being of not just learners, but faculty as well. There are many reasons why the development of research questions in your local context will help and serve your interests as educators where you are. And there is no reason to try to prioritize research questions that are not organic to your work and your interests as educators to try to get this work published in international journals. So we want to encourage an unapologetic and energetic curiosity and engagement with your own educational context and the challenges and opportunities that it presents. A contextual framework also includes a summary of evidence that the general problem, so you look at the problem in your context, and now you look at it one level of abstraction higher. So what the general problem is shared in other settings. And you want to also summarize research addressing this problem elsewhere. What are the concepts that they used and what are the findings? So if you focus your introduction on a particular problem in your setting and the literature review on how the work that has been done, whether it's in big five countries, whether it's in your own country or countries in a similar region, you want to summarize how that work specifically informs the problem that you're trying to solve and ways in which that literature may fall short, necessitating your study. Okay. So what that is that's a statement of the gap in the literature that makes it necessary for you to do this study because there does not exist evidence to inform your problem solving in your local setting. And then what that allows you to do is offer, again, and this is all in your introduction section, a statement of how the research in your setting fills this gap in the larger literature and adds insight to solving the general problem. So, here are some components to the contextual framework that allow you to get to this point. The first is reflexivity. The second is a situated problem statement. The third is specification of context. And the fourth is specification of impact. And I'll go over each of these individually. So, reflexivity. In order to build a contextual framework, and this is something that you primarily see in the way that the introduction is framed and then how it's revisited in the discussion section. In order to get there, you need to engage in reflexivity in every stage of your research. So it's not just a process that occurs when you're writing up your study, but it's something that ideally is helping you as researchers think about what exactly you're doing and why, and how your place in your local context, in your institutional setting, in your cultural setting, your societal setting, the ways in which that position affects the questions that you're asking and how you go about answering them. And the what's valuable is that the reflexivity process is a way for you to account for this unique positionality in the way that you design and report your study. And I've cited here a really helpful guide to reflexivity. This is in qualitative research. It's an AMY guide, and the QR code should make it hopefully easy to access. That particular reference really does a nice job of describing the ways in which this reflection, ideally within your entire research team, helps you take it helps you make a reflection in action as you're proceeding with your research. And I would argue that it doesn't have to be applied only to qualitative studies, but it's actually very helpful even when you're designing survey studies or you're doing quasi experiments. The ways in which you set up your research reflect certain underlying assumptions about what is going on with learning and teaching in your setting and other things. Um, so reflexivity practice is rooted in a respect for and a valuing of subjectivity. That's a quote that comes from this paper. So instead of us trying to evade subjectivity and to participate in sort of a group deception that subjectivity can somehow be eradicated from the research that we're doing, what we're doing instead is accounting for that subjectivity and making explicit for the reader and for the referee who's evaluating a paper the ways in which we've brought subjectivity in and how it's influenced our work. So let's see. Okay, so here are some thought questions that can help you engage in reflexivity in the design and every phase afterward of your research. Um, Not all of the answers to these questions need to be included explicitly in your manuscript. What is important is that you continuously reflect as a team on these thought questions, keeping documentation of how and why your work came to be. And some of this documentation can then be used to write your manuscript. And these kinds of questions, when I'm reading a manuscript and there's kind of a notable contextual absence in the article, I know as a reader that there were very personal and subjective and nevertheless meaningful reasons for why the investigators engaged in their research. And knowing more explicitly about that why can really help the reader understand the relevance of that work, not just to you in your local setting, but to people elsewhere who share the similar why. Okay, so here's an example. This is kind of small font, so I'm going to read it for you, particularly those of you in the large group setting there in Hall A. This is ideally, this would be a great part of the seminar to have a group discussion. Um, so if there's a way to share in the chat, or I don't know how you want to structure Q&A, but these I have examples of each one of the different components of the contextual framework, and I would really love to discuss these with you. I wish I was there. So maybe there's a way to have this discussion later in the session. All right, this is an example of a TLM article published. It's opportunities for pedagogical change in Turkish medical education revealed in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. So the authors were very candid and in this reflection that they wrote in their article. They say the Turkish health sector was caught somewhat unprepared by COVID-19, and initially it was feared that the pandemic would paralyze the entire education sector there. At the onset of the pandemic, educational institutions turned to Higher Education Council, an authoritarian body supervising higher education in Turkey, for advice. Rather than treating the pandemic as an opportunity for radical change, Turkish educational institutions simply followed the advice from the council by switching to online teaching very quickly. For example, most Turkish schools and universities rushed to video their lectures and provided the recorded lectures to homebound students via online platforms. Unfortunately, this overnight transformation was not informed by state-of-the-art learning design principles or by adequate consideration of innovative technological affordances that were available. In essence, these instructional programs were what researchers have labeled emergency remote teaching rather than authentic online learning. And then they go on to say, the study was conducted amidst the uncertain and tense atmosphere brought about by the pandemic. being academics ourselves, we experience this uncertainty on a personal level. Despite the uncertainties, we worked together with a shared concern for the future of medical education and a drive to find answers. However, the tensions inherent in the pandemic potentially led to implicit biases and divergent viewpoints within the research team, particularly during semi-structured interviews when informal conversations among colleagues allowed concerns to be expressed and shared. We took this situation as an opportunity to identify additional thematic fields for the research. To address this, we implemented measures such as holding regular online meetings, working collaboratively during the analysis process, and carefully identifying similarities and agreements in the coding and theme definitions, which greatly minimized biases. We also questioned ourselves as new information came in through interviews, whether we ourselves could do things differently in our own teaching practice. So this second paragraph was from the methods section, and the first paragraph that I read to you was from the introduction. And what it did for me, and I'll be curious in the comments for what it did for you, is to me, it very much personalized what the authors were trying to do, and why they were motivated to conduct this particular study and what made it challenging. And it, you can, when you have a description like this, you can start to see why they asked some of the questions that they asked in their interviews, and why they chose the thematic frameworks that they did to analyze their data and so forth. So I thought they did a really nice job of explaining that this was not a straightforward situation for educators, and they wanted to innovate, but had these challenges in which innovation was potentially constrained. And they saw it as their obligation as educators to move forward from this. Okay, so building a contextual framework, the situated problem statement, this is identifying the practical or conceptual problem you set out to solve. So this helps the reader understand why a problem already discussed in the literature, sometimes in a lot of literature, remains unsolved in your local setting. And it helps the reader understand how solving the problem in your local setting informs the literature and problem solving in another setting. And here I have made a QR code to give you easy access to Lorelei Lingard's paper, Joining a Conversation, and you may have seen this before, the problem gap hook heuristic. And this is really helpful guidance. I use it myself when I'm authoring articles. It's not the only way to write a compelling introductory section that's focused around a problem statement, but it's very clearly written advice. It's short and really, really helpful. So I highly recommend that. What this does is it transforms the immediate concrete problem in your setting into a particular case of something more general. And that is how you demonstrate how your local problem is relevant to people elsewhere who share the same general problem. So here are some thought questions along those lines. Why did solving this problem matter to you? What does the literature related to this problem say about how it was solved in other settings? Let's say some of the most common things I see are things like how to get faculty members in the clinical setting to give better feedback to students. Another thing that's been studied a lot is how students develop a professional identity over the course of their training and as they transition from classroom to clinical settings. There's a lot of research out there, and there's a lot of international research out there, but that doesn't mean that the findings of that research fully inform the particular educational challenge that you have in your setting. So it's important to articulate where that gap is, why this literature is insufficient, requiring a new study, And what new richness to the literature will findings from solving your problem add? And here is an example of a problem statement. This one is titled Learning Clinical Reasoning, the Experience of Postgraduate Psychiatry Trainee Doctors in Qatar. And in this paragraph, they say, many medical institutions developed specific clinical reasoning, CR, curricula as evidenced in international literature that supports the role of various forms of CR curricula in undergraduate and postgraduate medical education. These curricula accommodated cognitive development, integrated conceptual and experiential knowledge, and incorporated theoretical constructs like self-efficacy, observational, and collaborative learning. These curricula will likely improve further with more understanding of the contextual learning specific to the CR process. Understanding the local work culture and organizational structure is also essential for effective training. This research explored the postgraduate psychiatry trainee doctor's experience of CR learning in the psychiatry training programs and the mental health services of Qatar. Psychiatry was the focus of this research, as CR in psychiatry may carry unique complexity compared to other medical fields. Psychiatry can be highly subjective and ambiguous, which may obscure the clarity of CR processes. The published research in CR learning in Qatar is minimal. No previous local research addressed CR learning in psychiatry or explored CR contextual learning. My local postgraduate psychiatry curriculum does not have a specific CR curriculum either. Hence, studying the psychiatry trainees' CR experience adds valuable insight to the specifics of the psychiatry CR processing and learning in the local context and helps understand the local contextual factors that could work as a hidden curriculum. So I felt that this author did a very good job of articulating what the general findings were of the literature and where specifically the gaps were that necessitated her study. Okay, I'm trying to keep an eye on the chat as well here. Okay, I think we're good. Okay, specifying context. It's really, really important. Specifying context helps the reader understand what specifically it is about your setting that makes it meaningfully different from other settings. So when you contextualize your study, you don't need to give all the context. That would make for a very long and potentially dry manuscript. What you want to do is focus on the elements of your context that warrant a deeper look and that introduce potential for novel insights about a problem. So when you say that it's important to study a particular educational problem in your setting, it's important to articulate the ways in which your setting are different from is different from the settings in which the main body of research was itself conducted. Okay, so not all characteristics of the setting are necessarily important, but what should happen is emphasis should be placed on the ones that are. So the specifying context thought questions are, what characteristics of your local setting are relevant to the problem you are trying to solve? What characteristics make your setting meaningfully different from other settings in which this problem was investigated? And what conceptual frameworks used to frame the problem in other settings could be used to identify meaningful aspects in your setting? Excuse me. So here's an example. This is a Chinese study, coping strategies of failing international medical students in 2 Chinese universities, a qualitative study. And they say China hosts a large population of international medical students enrolled in Bachelor of Medicine and Bachelor of Surgery programs. As the majority of such students come from low-income countries in Asia and Africa and are self-sponsored, They tend to heavily invest their time, effort, and money into achieving the knowledge and skills required to graduate as competent doctors. This is no different from international medical students studying in the UK or elsewhere. International students may draw on multiple coping strategies when facing academic challenges and failure. They may use campus resources such as the Writing Center, financial aid, the library, academic advising, and international student services. Seeking help from senior students, mentors, lecturers, and tutors, co-nationals, international peers, and host students is also effective for students coping with learning challenges. So here they're citing a large body of literature. Preparing for lectures early, recording lectures, prioritizing assessments, and effective time management are other important strategies that students can use to cope with academic pressure. An important issue that has received little academic attention is how failing international medical students manage to achieve academic success after failing in Chinese universities, which provide relatively little proactive support to international students. So here's the aspect of the Chinese university that they have identified as different. Given the large number of these students and their importance to healthcare in the developing world, this topic merits further investigation. Okay, so there is a risk when providing context, and I've seen this as an editor as well. What happens when too much context is provided is we typically will see this in the introduction, um, and the bulk of the introduction is detailed and comprehensive description of the local problem and the approach to solving it. So here now, everything is focused locally. And then at the very end, there's a single sentence that studying the problem will advance the literature without actually describing why or how that problem advances the literature. Whoops. Whoa. Sorry. So um, too much context can also get you feedback from editors and peer reviewers that, hey, this looks like a local study to us. It looks like it has local relevance only. Maybe you should try a local journal. And really what the challenge is shifting this balance so that you're including context and foregrounding context, but doing it in a way that highlights how your context is a provides a rich opportunity to inform this more general literature. Specifying impact, articulate how learning in your local context enriches understanding of the general problem shared by others. So in the discussion section, revisit the literature cited in the introduction, describing what the present study adds to practice in your setting and elsewhere. And here there's a QR code link to Glenn Regere's 2010 conceptual paper where he talks about how to think about the impact of educational research. And the message in that article is that your local audience will be interested to know how you solved your problem locally. Readers elsewhere will appreciate new ways of thinking about the problems they face in their own local setting. So here are some thought questions. How did answering your research questions in your setting confirm or add to the literature? What did you learn that readers in a similar context could use to solve their own educational problems? And what are the limits on how work done in your setting can apply elsewhere? There's nothing that's going to be universally applicable. So it's good to be reflective and candid about where this works and where it doesn't. An example, this is exploring factors influencing medical trainees' specialty choice, insights from a nationwide cross-sectional survey in Jordan. Here they say, the selection of a specialty can be impacted by a variety of factors. One of the most important studied factors, especially in Jordan as a Middle Eastern country, is family influence. Our findings indicate that family influence plays a role in medical trainees' career choices, with 25.5% of respondents reporting that their families influence their specialty choice. I'm going to, in the interest of time, I'm going to skip a little bit. They talk about the patterns among men and women respondents and in their own study, and then they say this contrasts with the systematic review conducted by Leveillon et al., which determined that the family input on specialty choice held equal importance for both men and women. This observation may be explained by the variations in cultural and societal factors which are more pronounced and may have an apparent impact on women in the Arabic region. So I thought they did a nice job of identifying the elements of their context that were important and yet articulating how that information that they gathered added nuance to our understanding about family influence on specialty choice. There is a risk here when specifying impact of doing all your context setting in the discussion. In this case, the discussion starts with a brief review of the results, followed by a comprehensive literature review that was not included in the introduction in order to situate the findings. When there is contextual absence in the beginning, context setting in the discussion makes the reader wonder early on why the study was done and what value it adds to the literature. If readers don't know from the start the study's purpose and value may not persist, those readers may not persist so far as the discussion to learn why. So you want to be sure that you have your comprehensive literature review in the intro and not in the discussion. And it's an unfortunate reality that that structure is imposed on these papers, but it is very challenging for the readers to understand the rationale behind your study if the contextualizing literature review comes at the end. In a world where attention spans are very short, you want to sell your story right from the beginning. Okay, so to conclude, a global audience is a nebulous concept that's held by stakeholders in the publication process. Writing to a so-called global audience while maintaining your voice can be accomplished by including a contextual framework in your research design and reporting. And contextual frameworks have 4 elements: reflexivity, the situated problem statement, context specification, and impact specification. And I just want to add as a closing comment that TLM is not the only journal that features articles that have contextual frameworks. Many HPE or health professions education journals do, because using contextual frameworks demonstrates that your work was systematic and that your findings matter to readers outside your local setting who share similar problems, no matter where those readers are. And with that, I would be delighted to take your questions. I appreciate your time this morning.
Thank you, Dr. Anna, for a very insightful presentation. So we would like to have now the questions from the audience here, as well as from the online participants, who are very welcome to post their questions on the shared link in the chat box. So kindly click that link and post your questions.
And hello, Dr. Anna. This is Moin, and a very good evening to you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for giving us a very clear idea of what to include and what to focus on in various segments of our articles for them to be globally relevant. One of the things that a problem that we have is that English is not our mother tongue. It's not really our language, and many of our readers are not experts and adept at writing academic English. So they may be presenting what you've said, but the style of writing is not uh, good enough for international journals. What I noticed in the very nice examples that you presented today was the very beautiful, crisp style of writing that the Chinese, the Jordanian, and the Turkish authors had. What can our writers do to, improve that? Any advice?
That is a great question. And I'm gonna offer a little inside scoop in that at TLM we work with authors directly to help with English language editing. So part of what you're seeing in the fluid language is a coaching effort directly with authors that we have found to be really, really helpful in helping them convey in a crisp way what it is that they really want readers to know about the work that they did. So it wasn't all on the authors to develop that capacity on their own. We actually did work with these authors to help with that. Um, the but that aside, I don't know honestly of any other journal that does that because it is time consuming. It's very rewarding work, but it is time consuming. Um, but some things that I would recommend are this. One is I would recommend um, if you can get your hands on Lorelei Lingard and Chris Watling's book called Story Not Study. It is a collection of primers on various aspects of writing craft in health professions education journal articles. And the problem gap hook heuristic primer that I gave you the QR code for in this presentation is one of the primers that are collected in this book, but they have guidance on writing discussion section and how to write a limitations report and how to I think they have one of their primers relates to how you present qualitative data in a compelling way. So they've thought a lot about writing craft and have put together these articles that would be really, really helpful. So I'd highly recommend that book. Um, the other thing that I would recommend, and I believe that there will be another seminar in this series that will go into this particular exercise, but reading. So there are different ways that you can read a journal article. And when you have journal clubs, typically what we're looking at is the scientific rigor of the study, or we might be looking at the practical implications of the work for our educational practice and so forth. But another way to read an article is to read it for the author's craft. How do they accomplish, what is crisp about that writing? How did they, what were other ways that they could have said the same thing that would have been less crisp, for example? And when you're with a group and you are exploring how this writing reflects various aspects of writing craft, that potentially then gives you a different way of looking at your own writing. And so that can be really valuable. And like I said, I think we're going to provide another seminar that will provide guidance on how to read for craft. It's really pretty fun. And then finally, the last thing I would recommend is, and I don't mean for this to be self-serving, you could review for anyone, but I highly recommend participating in peer reviews because it can be really, really helpful to to do the kind of reflection that's necessary as a reader to do a review of an article, um, that reflection on the impact that the writing is having on you is really, really helpful for then shaping the writing that you are doing for other people. And when you do more and more reviews and you see what you observed relative to what other peer reviewers observed, it can give you a very different way of accessing writing and evaluating writing. So, and then of course, the final thing is just a lot of practice, um, and working with mentors who are willing to coach you through that writing process.
Right, thank you. Dr. Anna, we have a couple of comments and questions in the chat as well from our online participants, if you would like to address any.
Okay, I see. Let's see, am I looking? Ah, oh, wow, okay. I was looking in the wrong spot. Yes, okay. And yeah, I'd be happy to, if you wanted to share the slides, I would be happy share them as widely as you would find useful.
Right, thank you so much.
Okay,
We have one
responsibility.
question.
Okay, is there one I should focus on here? Hi, Kulsum. Hello.
Yes, we have a question.
Okay, yes, responsibility of manuscript reviewers, really important. I at TLM for the last several years, we have been reckoning with how the peer review process needs to change to ensure that our peer review process is one where the reviewers themselves are sensitive to the fact that they exist within a context and that they are making judgments about relevance that are shaped by their context. And we're trying to um, make reviewers aware of their own positionality so that when they're judging the relevance of another author's work, they are um, they are presenting that judgment with their own sort of personal limitations section in their review of how and the ways in which they're approaching that work. And that is something that I think we're seeing more journals do, because as much as there is an onus on writers to celebrate and share their context, there is also a need to change the peer review system so that peer reviewers and editors can recognize the value of that context as well. So the kinds of things that I shared today are ways that I think we can a little bit get around the problem of peer review, but it's not everything. It's not, the onus is not entirely on authors to do that. So we should share the
Right.
particular context of our study as attractive as possible to general or global context so that we have a better chance to be published in most influential journals. I'm not sure I understand this question. I don't think that if I'm understanding this correctly, the question is, should we make our context look um, as attractive as possible to general or global context? Um, and I would, I'm conflicted about how to give this advice. Um, I don't think that you need to present your context in any way that's not authentic to your
Yeah.
experience of that context as it relates to the educational problem. And what happens is if you try to present that context differently than authentically to try to please this audience, it comes off as like uncanny, and it creates questions on the part of the people who are reading it because it doesn't feel right. And I think when you get feedback from reviewers or editors that say um, this context isn't relevant to us, sometimes my impression is that sometimes that is code for saying you've presented your context in a way that doesn't strike us as authentic. And we don't have language to put on that because we've spent all this time pretending that context doesn't exist. So we're just going to say that your study is not relevant. My advice is to be as authentic as possible to the elements of your context that relate to your educational problem.
Right. Thank you, Anna, because I think that whatever explained is very well and detailed in terms of the further queries that have been asked in the chat box, as I can see to most of the questions here. Any questions from our participants, our audience here?
I have a comment, and I just want to stress something. I'm Roxana Zaveri. Thank you so much, Professor Cianciolo. And I think this was one of the most interesting talks because as a reviewer, I often come across issues exactly the way you said. They go on and on and on, and then they say, okay, this has never been studied in Pakistan. But that's not enough to get it published. So I think it's the balance between what your local context problem statement, and we stress it in all our courses, the exact problem statement and how it affects the global literature, or where, if it's already been answered and you haven't applied it, then you should know that. But if it hasn't been addressed, then focus on the local context. That may be the gap. So I think you've done a really brilliant job of specifying it in that way. So my last thing was, I know Deb, so if you meet Deb Clayman, say hello. Okay.
I sure will. Right. Yes. I'd be happy to. Thank you for your comments. I'm hoping my intent is to write up this presentation as an editorial in TLM so that we can share as widely as possible some of the guidance in this particular seminar. There's so many great questions here. I want to answer all of them.
Thank you. So in the interest of time, I would just like to have one last question here. How do different research paradigms, for example, positivist and constructivist, address the role of context in HPE research?
Really good question. By and large, the positivist paradigm treats context as noise or error and tries to eliminate the influence of context from the subject of inquiry. And so, and I think because so much of the work in medical science is done from a positivist tradition or background, philosophy, the way in which we think about educational research then is also one where we're expected to try to eliminate or obviate context as much as possible. That somehow makes the study more rigorous. Whereas a more constructivist lens or a post-positivist perspective is one that acknowledges that context is involved in everything, and that it's impossible to produce meaningful research results in some way isolated from context. And in education, context, this is a very hackneyed phrase, but context really is everything, because what constitutes an educational intervention is different. Like, you can call it the same name: problem-based learning, team-based learning, you name it. You can call it the same thing, but what actually happens in the interactions with people, with each other, with the content, with educational technologies and other things, patients, it's different in every context. And the constructivist paradigm recognizes that. And so when you see research that's conducted in that kind of way, you're seeing a much better accounting for context in the way in which the work proceeded.
Thank you for your answer, Dr. Anna. We would now like to conclude the question and answers here. I would like to invite our chair, Dr. Sanya Saswari, for sharing a few comments.
Yeah, well, is it okay if I sit here? Hi, Anna.
Hi.
Hi, how are you? So, Anna, I'm so immensely grateful for this. Really, we've been planning this for I don't know how many years, and finally you're here, and I'm so very grateful. You've been so generous with your time, and I think this was an awesome presentation. I'm looking forward to more. I just wanted to say a couple of things. I think the examples you showed really also tell us that all of us need to do a lot more reading, because I think all of these examples really help us sort of understand, how to build that context. And I think we're all aware of our context, and I'll echo what Dr. Moin said. I think a lot of us struggle with language. And I was just wondering, maybe what we need to start doing is write this in our own language, and use AI to see how that gets translated, and do that as a project. Really, I mean, so right there, I was just thinking of so many things. But I just want to thank you once again. I'm looking forward to our future collaborations. We're going to be doing a few more sessions, inshallah, God willing, and hope to see you soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. I'm looking forward to the next session.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you.
Sure,
thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. We now conclude the session, and thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Thank you, Dr. Anna.